Heath Rath, and I'm here with Stephanie and Lacey to talk about the third domain of the Peak criteria, home environment. Steph, would you like to tell us a little bit about home environment?
Sure. This is the domain of Peak that really talks about the built environment of the organization. And quite often when people hear home environment, they immediately think beautiful furnishings, lots of amenities, multi-million-dollar remodeling projects, and they think, we can't do this. The beauty of the Peak criteria related to the environment is that while it recognizes that having a comfortable, pleasant space to be in is important, the focus is really more on how residents interact with the environment around them and how the environment supports people in carrying out the choices and living their daily life. So what we're really getting at is creating a home rather than a workplace for the staff in the organization. So we do want something that's comfortable, but we want that comfort to reflect the people that live in the organization. So we're looking at personalization of the resident room. We're looking at creating spaces throughout the building where residents feel comfortable having family and friends and just settling in to quietly read a book or something. We want the environment to offer privacy for people and true control over how they utilize the space. And we also want to make sure that the environments, in order to be person-centered, the environments really have to support people in being able to do the things that they want to and assist them when they need some assistance in providing care for themselves. So I'll let Lacey go ahead and talk a little bit more about the resident room.
Yeah, Stephanie, the resident room is really that one place in the organization that's theirs, you know. And of course we know that in a lot of nursing homes there are some shared rooms, and even within those semi-private or shared spaces we need to be thinking about how we can promote privacy and comfort within those spaces. So the real goal or overall goal of this area is that the bedrooms provide opportunities for privacy, for personalization and comfort, that the resident can really put their imprint or stamp on that space. So the first supporting practice gets at that privacy piece. And so we want to look to arrange those rooms for privacy wherever possible. And this will be particularly critical in a semi-private room, is just kind of thinking about how the space is oriented and organized to do as much as we can to promote that privacy. But the other piece really comes in how we interact with the resident's room as staff members. So really respecting the space of the resident room as theirs. And so it means knocking before we enter, but even things that are more subtle, like housekeeping. For instance, if they go in and clean a resident's room when the resident's not there, are they just going in and moving things around and replacing or putting things in different spaces without really considering if that's what the resident would want? Are they working with the resident as they're cleaning that space when they're doing it? And that's really respecting boundaries. We also really want to be serious about how we're entering resident rooms, knocking and waiting for permission to go in when residents can give us permission, people who can tell us that. So we need to create the environment where that's an expectation. And so one of the ways we really harbor that into people is by training on that periodically. Making it maybe a part of your staff in-servicing periodically or an annual training, just to make sure that that's the expectation here. Now the second supporting practice really gets on that personalization and putting a resident's personal stamp on their space. So this is one of the core areas that's a little bit tricky in that there are 4 options for home to choose from here. So homes must pick 2 of these 4 options. So the first option is that the decor reflects residents' preferences, that residents choose paint color of their room, that bed and furniture choices are supported, and then the other option is that you develop a policy around personalization. So homes can pick 2 of those 4. Now the first one is really that there's evidence, or you have evidence that the resident space and the choices of furnishings in there are reflective of the resident. So we went on a lot of site visits last year, and I really remember a resident space that I knew right off when I saw it, this is her space. It had her own bed in there, her own bedding, had her recliner, and then she collects angels. And every inch of the room was covered in angels. And that was definitely her space. So it's very evident that personalization was supported there. You know, when they went about doing the level of personalization of that space, some things really need to go into that before all of this is put into place in the room, like assessing personal safety. Is the bed that she's bringing in safe for her? What are the potential risks, and has the resident been, you know, communicated those risks and educated about those? The angels, if there are really, really heavy ones, are they secured to the point that they won't knock over and hit somebody over the head or whatever? And also thinking about the personal safety of others who might enter that room as well. So those need to be kind of thought about as people are bringing in their personal belongings. We don't want to be restrictive about the things because of safety issues, but thinking through the safety issues and minimizing them as much as we can. Another example of a really personalized space was a resident's room that was really set up like a hobby room. The resident did not sleep in a bed, she slept in a recliner, so she opted to have her bed removed since she slept in a recliner anyway, and then have a whole wall of storage cabinets set up for her like sewing equipment and things like that. And that really was supporting how she wanted to use this space. Now the next one is that residents have a choice in paint color. And this one is really kind of hard to wrap your head around.
So does it mean that, you know, they have to offer a million swatches of colors like Home Depot, or, you know, what are the details around this?
Yeah, every maintenance man's nightmare, right? Yeah. It doesn't necessarily mean that. It means that homes need to be clear that residents have a choice in paint color. So they could go to Home Depot, select whatever color they wanted, and have that color painted. And residents need to know that up front, but it may be at the resident's expense. So the resident may incur an expense to have the room painted fire engine red, you know, and that cost may include what's going to take to repaint the wall so that it is attractive to another person who might move in there. We also need to think through roommate issues. If I want fire engine red and I'm living with Stephanie and she hates fire engine red, we need to kind of work that out and find a compromise, because we're sharing a space and you're going to have to look at that fire engine red wall the whole time. So it's really kind of thinking through those details around it. Some homes have opted to make 5 different paint colors available to people at no charge, and residents can pick between those and then let them know, if you don't like any of these and you have a particular color you want, we can do that, and this is what that would cost for you to do. Again, bed and furniture choices are supported, and that's one of the areas you can tackle. And I really encourage homes to think through in an action plan how they're going to address some of those safety issues and assessment of safety before moving those things in. And then developing a policy about all these things, and really that just formalizes it. And it can even, that policy could go in a move-in packet so that residents get that before they move in. So then the last supporting practice is self-care and mobility. And this really just gets at the room being set up for the optimal level of function and independence for the particular resident. So that means that the solutions to this self-care and mobility are going to be different for different residents. It's going to look different. So some examples might be lowering closet bars so that residents in wheelchairs can get their clothes on their own, or lowering mirrors if a person's in a wheelchair, or if somebody moves in who's really tall, making the mirror a little taller so that they don't see their belly button when they look in the mirror. Wayfinding cues for people with dementia. Things like a different colored door for the person, so it signals, you know, go to the door that's blue, that's your room. Things like that. So just adapting the environment so that it really functions as well as possible for the resident.
Great. Well, thank you. Looks like the next core here is resident use space. Steph, do you want to talk to us a little bit about resident use space?
Sure. What we're talking about with resident use space is really all of the other spaces in the building that residents use outside of their room. Lacey covered many things about the resident room, and some of those things kind of translate over into what we're talking about with the other spaces, but there are some specific things that go along with having community rooms and that type of thing that are addressed here in the criteria. The first of this is that there needs to be private space. Most residents have a roommate, which means there may not necessarily be complete privacy for that person in their room. So we need to make sure that our organization has spaces where a person could have family and friends for a private visit without their roommate or staff members being a part of that. Or it may also mean having spaces where a person can just have some quiet solitude to look out the window, get lost in their thoughts, or read a book. But making sure there are opportunities for individuals to have that privacy that they want in their lives. We also need to make sure with our bathing areas that they're providing that same kind of privacy and dignity that we're trying to provide for people in their rooms. So think about your bathing space. Is it also a storage room or someone's office? How many people are coming in and out of that space in the period of time that a person would be in there having a bath? We need to figure out ways to make sure that that's a space that a person can feel comfortable knowing there's not going to be a lot of in and out activity, there's not going to be a lot of interruption. So making sure that that truly is a private space for a person. And then we also need to make sure that just as we're trying to respect people's boundaries by knocking on the door of their room before we enter and not moving their things and taking over their space, that we're creating some of those same boundaries in these other spaces within the building. Now, certainly it's a little bit harder to have that kind of control over who's going in and out of those types of spaces, but we really need to think specifically with our staff about what kind of training we provide on those boundaries. So, for example, if I'm in the family room sitting with my daughter and my grandchildren and we're having a conversation, is it appropriate for staff members to come in and take my blood pressure? Is it appropriate for a few staff members that need to have a quick meeting to come in and use the table at the other side of the room? If I'm laying in the recliner watching a TV show, is it appropriate for staff members to stand behind me and have a conversation? So what kind of training and what kinds of conversations are you having with staff about respecting residents as they're using other spaces throughout the building? Certainly there are going to have to be some compromises when we're talking about a group of people sharing community type spaces, but there are ways that we can be respectful to one another even though we're sharing. The second supporting practice that goes along with this really relates to the self-care and mobility idea that Lacey talked about, and certainly some of the things like wayfinding cues throughout the building are important not just for the residents' room, but to help people get to the dining room or other spaces in the building that they want to be in. One of the pieces that's in this criteria relates to people being able to get outdoors. And what we want with this is people to be able to have access to fresh air when they want that fresh air. Now, at this point in time, there are still some details of this criteria that need to be worked out. So we're working with the state surveyors to figure out how we can make sure people have access to the space outdoors and that fresh air that they want, but still make sure that we're providing for their safety. So at this point in time, homes will not be evaluated on this piece about having access to outdoor space. And once we get this criteria a little bit better defined and we really know what's going to provide that balance of safety that the state surveyors are looking for and this choice and autonomy that person-centered care is really focused on, we'll notify the homes through the newsletter and emails to let them know clearly what that criteria is, and then when we're going to start evaluating on that piece of this supporting practice. Back to this idea of having adaptations to help support people with mobility. thinking through how far away is the dining room from where residents' rooms are. Are there ways that maybe we could have a bench midway so that if a person wants to walk to dinner but they can't make it that whole way without a break, that there's a place where they need that break to sit for a moment, but they still have the opportunity to walk to meals if they want to. And then the third piece of this gets at the idea of removing institutional elements. And so one of the first things that comes to mind is the overhead paging. I doubt that any of us have an overhead, although sometimes I wish I did, have an overhead paging system in their home, letting us know when somebody else needs help or when we need another member of the family to come to the room. So we really need to think about how we're handling our communication within the organization to make sure that that's respectful of the fact that we're working in these residents' homes. So many organizations have eliminated overhead paging completely and only use it in the case of an emergency, or they have switched to wireless systems that page a phone or some sort of a device to let staff members know when they're needed somewhere or when communications need to happen between staff members. But we want to reduce as much as possible that excess noise so it's a peaceful environment for people. We also want to think about the institutional equipment. What are we storing in the hallways? What's the policy related to laundry and trash and medication carts? It's very hospital-like and very institutional to have those things lined up down the hallways. And in addition to creating an environment that doesn't feel like home, sometimes those things create barriers and prevent residents from being able to ambulate through the building on their own or be able to go into the spaces that they want to use within the organization. So we need to think through policies on how we store things, but also policies on how we manage that type of equipment while it's in use. For example, as housekeepers are in rooms doing their cleaning, where are the carts or the supplies that they're using? How are we handling things while staff members are actually using them?
I think a really good practice that I've seen people do is just handing out little cameras or digital cameras and going on a little scavenger hunt through the building and saying, take pictures of the hauls, and then I think when people look at those pictures, they pick out pretty quick, whoa, there's a lot of stuff there, It kind of helps organizations assess where they're at with this and what they can do and problem solve how they can change things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think families can be helpful here too, because families clearly know what home looks like. And so to have them involved in the process and explain what it is that you're trying to do, and they've got eagle eyes, and they can help you to see what doesn't look like home. Sometimes when we're in this each and every day, we kind of become blind to the institutional clutter that's all around us because it's things we need to do our job. And often where we're storing those or where we're placing them while we use them is out of what's most efficient for us. And so sometimes having fresh eyes to look at those things can help us see the things in our organizations that certainly aren't home-like. A piece of this also relates to the nurses station. If you think about home, there isn't a large nurses station in the center of your home. What we're seeing homes do is go to something that's much smaller, more like a home office, and something that's closer to where they're actually interacting with residents. So instead of having this large towering structure at the heart of the building, we're seeing people pull to the neighborhood or to the household a small desk that kind of serves that same function but looks very different and doesn't create that central hub of activity. So looking for more home, things that are more like we use in our home to accomplish some of the same things that we need to be accomplishing in the organizations can be a way to help eliminate some of that institutional feel and create home. Often we hear people say we want to make it more home-like, but truly what our goal is not home-like. We want to create home, and when we're creating home, we're thinking about how residents are using the space and not so much about what's the most efficient for us as staff members in that space.
Well, Steph, Lacey, thank you very much for walking me through this domain number 3 home environment. Really seems like the cores and standard practices in it give homes a good toolkit to create the true home that you were talking about.